Evening, everyone. Welcome to the Midtown Scholar Bookstore's virtual event series. My name is Alex Brubaker. I'm with The Scholar, and as always, I am live in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania at the bookstore. Whether you're joining us on Crowdcast or Facebook Live or even YouTube Live, thanks so much for tuning in. Welcome to our live stream series where we host authors and speakers, and we keep the conversation going about books we love. Our featured book this evening is Nerve, The Adventures in the Science of Fear. If you haven't yet purchased the book, I'd like to encourage you to do so. Purchasing Eva's book through us helps support the author, our staff, this event series, and it helps the bookstore continue to run and stay afloat during this strange, weird time that we're in. We're offering free media mail shipping in the US for a limited time to make the price more reasonable for you. So if you click the green button below, it's right below my face. That will direct you to our website to purchase a new copy of Eva's book. If you're watching this through Facebook Live or YouTube Live, just look in the comments section and you should see we've provided a link there as well. Or simply head to midtownscholar.com. And thanks for the support, everyone. I've mentioned this a couple times, but the outpouring of kind words and well wishes that we've received over the past month has been really heartwarming. So thanks again for thinking of us and tuning in to these events. Now this evening, we are honored to welcome best-selling authors Eva Holland and Christopher McDougall to virtual Harrisburg. Trained as a foreign correspondent for the Associated Press, Christopher McDougall covered wars in Rwanda and Angola before writing his international bestseller, Born to Run. His fascination with the limits of human potential led him to create the Outside magazine web series, Art of the Hero. He is also the best-selling author of, get ready for it, Running with Sherman, The Donkey with the Heart of a Hero. And I should mention that we have signed copies with a replica of Sherman's hoofprint in the book. Click the link below, and that will direct you to where you can purchase more copies of Chris's book. Our author this evening is Eva Holland. She is a correspondent for Outside magazine and a former editor at Up Here, the magazine of Canada's far north. Her work has also appeared in Esquire, Wired, Bloomberg, Pacific Standard, Smithsonian, Grantland, National Geographic News, and many other outlets. Her work has been nominated for a Canadian National Magazine Award, anthologized in the Best American Science and Nature Writing, the Best Women's Travel Writing, and Best Canadian Sports Writing. She lives in Canada's Yukon Territory. Of course, Eva's new book that we are here for today is titled Nerve, Adventures in the Science of Fear. I'll offer one blurb from author Blair Braverman, who's one of my personal favorite writers. She writes, Nerve is a gorgeous journey, a love letter to life itself, to the instincts and relationships that sustain us, to all the ways we find to push through, end quote. Now, a quick note before I hand it over to Chris and Eva. We think the best part about these events is audience interaction. So even though we're not in person, we still want you involved. If you have a question for Eva or Chris throughout the program, please use the Ask a Question button. It's right below my face. You'll see it there beneath the green button there. Click that, submit your question, get those questions in, and we'll have time afterwards to go over them. But finally, without further ado, please join me in welcoming onto the screen Christopher McDougall and Eva Holland.
Hey, Eva, first round of applause for Alex. You hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, round of applause for Alex. Nobody gives a better book introduction than Alex Brubaker. Like when he gives an introduction, I feel like, shit, I got to up my energy now because this guy's going to blow me off the stage.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Alex. Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Hey, so to anybody tuning in, Eva and I pre-gamed and had a conversation about what tonight's talk should be about. And we made one agreement, like everybody knows what the current situation is. Everybody's up to their ears in like malaise. So we decided we're going to put our money up, $100 bet to whoever first uses like the P word, the C word, the Q word, anything that brings down the energy. So I'm going to double it. I'm also going to try and parlay, Eva. I'm going to try and go the whole hour without a single F-bomb, which has never been done. So that's $200 riding, and whoever loses the bet will donate the money to a charity of Alex's choice.
All right. Cool. And I've got $100 in funny Canadian money here, which is only like $72 US, but we're going to go with it for now.
We're going to go for it. So that brings up my first question. Where the hell are you, and why the hell are you there?
I live in Whitehorse. It's the capital city loosely defined of the Yukon Territory in northern Canada. So I am north of British Columbia and east of Alaska. I'm about 100 miles from the Alaska border. And yeah, it's a small city. I always say the Yukon is the size of California with 35,000 people instead of 35 million. Most of us are here in Whitehorse. There's some smaller outlying communities. And yeah, we play outside. It's cold a lot of the time, but it's a really wonderful community and a great place to be a writer.
Well, the second part of that question was, why the hell are you in Whitehorse?
I moved here, strange as this might sound, strategically for my career. I had just started out freelancing full-time a little over 10 years ago, and I was living in my hometown, which is Ottawa, the capital of Canada. And if you know anything about Ottawa, you know, it's a very, people say things like it's clean, it's nice, lots of green space. It's not like an exciting place to be necessarily. It's, you know, it's a government town, and I didn't think it was the best place to be a freelance writer. I wanted to have a bit more of an adventure. So,
oh, sorry, that's my phone. Hang on. Okay, hang on. All right,
is that a donkey?
Yeah, donkey bray. It's a donkey bray ringtone, which
okay.
Has annoyed everybody in earshot for about 5 years now.
Oh, I thought it was an actual donkey joining the party here.
They will respond to it. If the donkeys hear my phone ring, they'll start braying back.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I moved here because I thought it'd be a good place to be a writer. I have a cousin here who was moved here for a fish biologist job, and I sort of followed him here and attached myself to his friend group and started freelancing about the Arctic and Alaska, and the rest is history, I guess.
And does that make you not only one of like 3 freelancers in Whitehorse, are you also the only epileptic rugby player in the entire Whitehorse community?
Do you know, there was another epileptic rugby player here, but he moved away.
Oh, thank God. Thank God, at least he just moved away. It wasn't something worse. Yeah.
It's a small world. There's more epileptic rugby players in the Yukon than you might think.
Than you might realize. Sorry, let's sort of dive into Nerve then. And I think the thing about it is you do a great job early on of explaining why someone who seems as fearless as you have to be an epileptic freelancing rugby player in the Yukon. Most people look at you and think, all right, man, she's bulletproof Wonder Woman, like gold bracelets. But what you point out is that there are these 3 kinds of fears, and you are unique on the planet if you don't have at least one of them brewing around inside of you. So what are those 3 categories of fears?
I sort of separated fears into, I guess, classic fear, like phobia, like, you know, your fear of spiders, of snakes, that sort of thing. That's what people tend to think of first when you think of what are you afraid of? Oh, well, you know, I've always been scared of sharks. That's sort of classic, what we might think of sort of a simple fear. And then there's trauma, which is much heavier subject. And then this kind of category of what I call sort of existential fears, the harder to get your hands on stuff, like fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of death, all this stuff that kind of floats around and is harder to pin down than, like, you know, I'm scared of spiders or I'm scared of heights.
Yeah. But the thing about it is, it seemed like you put yourself in so many precarious situations so many times throughout most of your early life. You know, you're always outside doing something, backpacking around Europe and, you know, going out on outdoor adventures. And so it would seem as if you are free of fears, but you talk about this mechanism of avoidance. Can you tell us more about that? Because, you know, it struck me that this might be the thing that actually lets that inner fear situation mushroom, because we also have this defense mechanism of avoidance. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, it was a funny thing. I actually had to convince my book editors a little bit, because I've always conceived of myself as a very fearful person. And you're right, it doesn't match what people see on the outside. And my editors were kind of like, well, people are going to think you're full of shit. You know, like
Yeah.
You gotta convince people that you're afraid because it doesn't seem like it, but there is a big disconnect between how we act and how we feel often, and there's two ways to go about that. One is you can sort of bull through the things that scare you and try not to let it show, or you can avoid them and then nobody would have any idea of what scares you. And avoidance is sort of the classic side effect or symptom of something like a phobia is avoidance, and it comes in degrees. It's pretty simple to say, okay, well, I'm scared of sharks, so I'm not going to go in the ocean. And if you don't live near the ocean, that's probably not a major hardship. But if you live near the ocean, maybe and then maybe then you can't be on the beach, and then maybe you can't be in a swimming pool, and then avoidance has this way of snowballing sometimes, and it even though it seems like sort of a logical defense mechanism, it can become its own problem, and it's something that they sort of discourage us from giving into. And ultimately, what I felt like is like the things I would have to avoid to feel safe was giving up too much. I didn't want to give up that much. I didn't want to give up road trips because I'd had a bunch of car accidents. I didn't want to give up hanging out with my friends in the mountains because exposed heights terrified me. It made my world too small. And so avoidance can be rational, can be logical in certain circumstances, but when it starts to snowball and take over your life, then it's as big a problem as the fear itself.
It's funny though, because the way you're describing it, you actually sort of illustrate my next question, which is maybe avoidance is a good thing. I mean, somebody who gets in a lot of car accidents, maybe should avoid a few road trips, and maybe being exposed in the Yukon wilderness is probably something you don't actually want to experience in your life. So is there a way of determining where you tip the balance, where avoidance becomes, as opposed to a life force, a protective force, it becomes actually a life sapping force?
Yeah, it's a tough line, I think, to figure out where it lies for each person. I probably should have driven in fewer winter storms on the Alaska highway. I said to my dad after one of those, I think after the last in the car accidents, I was like, should I even be allowed to drive? Like, is there something wrong with me? And he said, look, the odds caught up to you. He's like, how many 15-hour drives have you done on some of the worst roads on the continent by yourself in January in the dark? Yeah, like I've done a lot of those drives. My odds of always beating the trouble out there were I guess I ran out of odds, or however that works. But yeah, the line between avoidance as healthy and unhealthy is something that I'm still figuring out, I think. When I did the book, I wanted to face everything down and confront everything. And then partway through the book, I'm kind of like, well, this stuff makes me miserable though. Like, at what point should I do something I enjoy instead of trying to like prove that I can do it? What's the limit? And I don't know that I have a good answer for that yet, but I think even if you're asking the question, you're part way to figuring out the answer for yourself, maybe.
Interesting. Yeah. Although I want to hey, Alex, can we pause this whole thing and get Eva's dad to be like the third screen here? I really want I want to hear his tone when he's telling, hey, how many 15-hour drives can you do? Or is it like, how many 15-hour drives can you do? What I found really intriguing about your book early on was that I feel like I've heard so much about the flow state that by this point I associate it with diarrhea. I'm sick of hearing about the flow state, but nobody has written about the freeze state. And that's what I find so cool about your book is you describe being on a rock face and willing your feet to move. It's like Uma Thurman in Kill Bill, where she tries to make her toe move. You're trying to make your foot move, and you can't consciously control your lower extremities. And so to me, this is what's so cool about this book, is we've all been in that moment where suddenly you think you're master of your own domain and you're not. So can you talk about that too, about that whole state of freeze where you just can't order your body to do what you want it to do?
Yeah, I am much more intimately familiar with the freeze state than the flow state, unfortunately. Yeah. But it's a powerful thing, and it can make you feel like, what is happening here? Why am I not? Nothing's wrong. I know I'm being irrational. I'm safe. I can take this step, but I can't. And it's such a strange thing to experience. It's almost like kind of like an out of body experience. Like you're not in the driver's seat anymore, but you're kind of like in the back of, it's like like you've been possessed somehow, and your little voice is in the back of your head saying you're fine, what is going on, but you don't have the controls anymore, and it's so unsettling and so embarrassing, because it feels, when it's happening to you, it feels like you're the only person in the world it's ever happened to and will ever happen to, right? It's like you're completely alone in this state of paralysis. And it's the crazy thing about doing this book has been hearing from people who haven't just had like sort of similar experiences, but identical experiences. Like that's how universal this stuff is. There's a scene in the book where I freak out at the top of the cathedral in Florence in Italy. And I talked to a guy who was like, no joke, I also froze at the top of the cathedral in Florence in Italy. Like it's these feelings are so common and we don't talk about them a whole lot, I think.
Yeah. But the thing about it, you're absolutely right, because you think it's your own secret shame and you're the only one, and you don't want to kind of confess. But, I remember when I was down the Copper Canyon with Jen Shelton and a bunch of other ultra runners, and there was this amazing view on the edge of this freaking ridiculous cliff that led down to the jaws of hell. And I kept a good, I would say, quarter mile back. And Jen was doing handstands on the edge. And so, you talking here, there is actually a genetic theory of fear. Like, it's out of your hands, it's in your DNA. So, I mean, I'd be curious to hear you talk a little bit about the genetic theory and then sort of segue, if you don't mind, into like, why is Jen like way more of a badass than me?
There's probably something else Jen is afraid of that you just didn't happen to witness her responding to. No, not so much. Okay. Well,
not on Earth.
Yeah, they do think that they don't totally understand the factors that influence each person's sort of fear landscape, but they do think that genetics and heredity play a big part in it. They're still, as always with these things, nature and nurture, they're still untangling genetics versus how you're raised. But they do think that these things can be inherited. There's evidence to suggest that specific phobias can run in the family, as can anxiety disorders. So if you have a parent who has an anxiety disorder or phobia, you would be more likely to also have an anxiety disorder or phobia. But it doesn't tend to be the exact same. Like maybe one relative has a phobia of snakes and another has a phobia of wide open spaces, for instance. So that's a part of the puzzle. And the other part is we can learn these things from each other. They don't think so often that people acquire phobias from like a traumatic childhood experience, the way we used to think. Like, for a long time I was like, did I like fall down a flight of stairs? Like what happened to me to make me this way? But you can learn it in terms of seeing other people react. There's a woman in my book who developed a fear of mice after seeing her mom just lose her mind about a mouse running through the room. Her mom screamed and was terrified, and that sort of imprinted on the child, like, oh, this is something to be terrified of. And it took her decades to undo. It's something that we really pass on to one another, both genetically and behaviorally. And there's something, to your point about Jen, there's something called an inhibited personality that is not necessarily somebody who's phobic or anxious, but who's just maybe more introverted, more withdrawn, less likely to sort of put themselves out there. I would definitely consider myself an inhibited personality, and getting past those inhibitions has been, a big part of what I've done as an adult. But as a kid, I was like the kid who, a stranger tries to shake my hand and I hide behind my mom's skirt. And somebody like your friend Jen is probably not an inhibited personality ever, and might be what they call a high sensation seeker. Somebody who chases those experiences and those strong feelings, not necessarily only scary ones, but that's a part of it. They think a lot of people who do extreme sports are HSSs, and it's really interesting to see what scares some people and what doesn't. I have trouble explaining. I I attempted an ultramarathon here in the Yukon a couple years ago called the Yukon Arctic Ultra. And I got frostbite and had to drop out, as did almost everyone else that year. I went down to minus 45. And somebody tried to say, well, you know, obviously you're kind of fearless because you did that. It's hard to explain, like, well, step ladders frighten me and minus 45 doesn't. And it just doesn't. I'm not scared of the cold.
Yeah. Well, it kind of brings up the question then. I mean, I love the fact that you bring in this really cool fear researcher, you know, like a cutting edge fear researcher. And her way of gathering data was to have people basically jump out of planes, because she's like, ethically, as a scientist, if I want to track a fear response, I can't really necessarily throw people into a shark cage or ask them to like stand near a tornado. But, you know, skydiving is just like, oh, I almost dropped an F-bomb right there. But I caught it. Money's still mine. It's just stupid enough where people are going to like perspire like crazy and yet not run that higher risk of death. And then you asked her, like, have you ever gone skydiving? She's like, yeah, it sucks. So I love the fact that someone who's like a leading thinker in the field of anxiety and fear still hasn't quite, you know, figured out the strategies herself. But how about you? Like, have you come up with a little grab bag, you know, some like little sort of a, you know, toolkit of devices that people can start to use themselves?
To understand their fears or to try to overcome them?
You know, either one. I think B is probably better than A, but either one.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like her, I tried skydiving to see if I could sort of like pop my fear of heights, like, you know, just burst it if I went big enough. That's not how it works, it turns out. So I don't recommend, if there's something that really scares you, I don't recommend sort of like maximum shock and awe approach to exposure therapy. That's not, turns out that's not really how it works, because what we know about learning to overcome this stuff is that it's about retraining your brain from the pattern of fear response that it has adopted. And so you have to train your brain to stay calm. So scaring the absolute daylights out of yourself and hoping you'll sort of come through the other side is not the move. It's unfortunately, it's something sort of quieter and more incremental and more of a pain in the butt to do, frankly, is to try to like really gradually retrain your brain to not sort of ricochet down that fear response path. And because, you know, the more you respond with fear to these things, the more defined that path becomes, of course. And so it's a hard thing to undo. You know, if it's any comfort, the reason why it's hard to undo is because our fear memories are so durable and so powerful because they're intended to keep us alive. You know, you're only supposed to, if you survive, you know, in olden days, if you survive, there's a crocodile in that water hole. You want to remember forever, don't go back to that water hole, there's a crocodile in there, or whatever the case may be. And so that's why we struggle so much with these things, because they're built to be durable and they last better than our good memories, frankly, which is, you know, one of the hard things about being a person.
Yeah. So do you have a quick sort of a 1-2 step process for people to at least begin the process of retraining their brains? Like what's a good launching spot?
A good launching spot is to start small. So let's say you're afraid of elevators. The step one would be to even go and look at an elevator. Don't try to get in it right away. And when you can look at the elevator without, you know, your heart starting to race, without your pupils dilating, without all that stuff that we know is signs of fear and anxiety, then go stand right by the elevator doors. And then, you know, only go in the elevator once you can remain calm right up to the threshold, and get out again right away if you start to panic in the elevator, because every time you panic, you undo the good work you've done.
Right.
So it's all about just taking one step forward and seeing if you can remain calm. It's a really tiring process, frankly.
Yeah, but on the other hand, it also sounds kind of cool. You know, it seems to me like, you know, fear is this really powerful racehorse, you know, that you have to learn how to ride. It's a good racehorse, you know, it's going to get you in and out of cool situations, but you can't just think you're going to sling a leg over. I'm watching you smile and be like, what a tortured metaphor. But,
no, I think it's amazing. I'm going to steal it.
All right, man, go for it. It's the powerful racehorse. And I think in modern life, we just want the answer. Where's the pill? What's the answer? I got 30 minutes. Solve this effing problem that does not count as an F-bomb. Solve this problem for me. And I think the beauty of mastering a craft and is what this is all about. It's mastering the craft of understanding your fear. That's a cool thing about your book too, is man, you do a super brave deep dive into your own. What's in that glass?
Just water. Glass? It's just water.
Right. I thought maybe that's the secret to mastering your fears. It's like
just a pint of vodka.
Yeah, kettle. Here's the secret right here. Anyway, you do a real brave deep dive into your own life, and your own very painful situation with your family, which I won't go into because you do it way better than I could. Is that sort of an important step too? Is it that kind of semi-Freudian, like, hey man, let's peel back and see where this came from?
Yeah, I think it's important to know where you're coming from and why you are the way you are, and it gives you perspective too on kind of how far you've already come. Even if you might be frustrated with where you're at with fear and anxiety, but if you zoom out and look at in my case, my family situation, it gives you perspective. It gives you perspective on your own resilience, and in my case, sort of looking at without going into too much detail, it's all in the book, but looking at everything my mom had been through really made me respect sort of her bravery and resilience so much more. And I don't mean this negatively, but I had seen some of things about her as a form of weakness, I guess, and then understanding her strength then also helped me to understand my strength.
Interesting. Again, it's a part of that mastering what fear is all about, like understanding the power of it. Hey, speaking of people you respect, props to Ryan, man.
Yeah, I'm really lucky to have friends like that. Yeah. My friend Ryan basically peels me off the side of an ice climb when I'm in the freeze state early on in the book for people listening. And, it's good to have friends who are patient and kind and know how to hog tie you and drag you off a mountain if they have to.
But, it sort of makes me speculate too, that maybe that's part of the process, is surrounding yourself with people, almost like an intervention or like, I don't know, like a 12-step program, people that you can be upfront with and tell them, here's what I'm afraid of, and have them literally lead you by the hand. But I feel like Ryan popped up a couple times, I'm not sure if I feel like every once in a while, like when there's an emergency, Ryan pops up, being Mr. Cool. So do you feel that is an important part of the process too, like getting friends to sign on?
Definitely. Yeah, it made a big difference to be able to say, I'd love to go for a hike, but I might cry. I might lie down and cry in the middle. Because the options otherwise are what? You don't go hiking, or you go hiking with people that you're going to be embarrassed to cry in front of, and then you try really hard not to cry, and then it bursts out of you anyway, and it's horrible, and you never go hiking with them again. Like, there's knowing that you have a sort of a supportive network when you're trying to deal with this stuff is huge, and to have people that you're not ashamed to be afraid in front of is it really makes you feel safe.
I think all future editions of the book should have Ryan's cell phone number in the back, just for the crisis. Call Ryan. Hey, we should be tapping out in a second, but I got to ask you one question on a personal note. You say, I'm going to quote you, a group of editors at a magazine I wrote for regularly. Hang on. Repeat. A group of editors at a magazine I wrote for regularly had an edible arrangement sent to our door, not once, but multiple times. What magazine was that? Who was the editor?
That was Up Here magazine, the magazine that covers Northern Canada. Yeah, they sent an edible arrangement to my dad's house after my mom died. It was pretty amazing. I emailed them and I was like, how did you get my dad's address? And they were like, we're journalists, man.
I like that. The chest thumping Up Here magazine. Hey, we're Up Here magazine. Nothing stops us. Yeah. I thought those guys deserve a shout out because I think I was freelancer for like 20 freaking years. And you know how many edible arrangements I got ever? Big old zero. Yeah, well, I know. Boo-hoo for me, right? But still, I thought that was very cool, those guys.
It was very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we sort of throw ourselves into the lion's den and take some questions, I got a feeling that I probably missed something obvious So the whole time I was talking, what was in the back of your mind? Like, why doesn't McDougall ask me this?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't think anything was in the back of my mind saying, why didn't you ask me about that? I thought you asked great questions.
So we pulled off the perfect interview together.
We did. And here we are, and we haven't forfeited our money yet.
All right. So cool. Alex, should we fire away and let the
Yeah.
hecklers step?
Yeah, let's do it. So to our viewers out there, if you have a question, just submit it with the Ask a Question button down below. It's below our faces here. First off, Chris, I can't believe it. You haven't dropped an F-bomb yet.
Well, it's only been 30 minutes.
Hey, Eva, just when Chris was at our bookstore, there was maybe 250 people in the room there, and in the first 5 minutes, Chris dropped an F-bomb. So as an event coordinator, I know things can get a little dicey with him.
And that was with Dr. Alexandra Horowitz, and just because of the prestige of her company, I was like, all right, dude, best behavior, don't do it. And then I think I went slightly more than 72 seconds.
First off, Chris, I just have to ask you, how are Sherman and Matilda?
Oh, you know what? They are actually right outside my window. I have no idea if this is going to work, and it's probably a stupid idea. I'm going to try and
show us the donkeys.
Sherman and Matilda are the donkeys, yeah.
Yeah, it's not going to work, but I'm going to try.
Okay.
So, but works at all. Can you see flower?
Ooh.
Oh yeah.
You see her?
Yeah.
A little blurry.
Matilda, and Sherman's back there. All right. So thanks for asking. And they're doing great. They're doing really good. It's springtime, so they have green grass. They're thriving.
That's awesome. Good to hear. All right, we're going to get to some audience questions. First up, we have a question from Don. They say, do you think fear is similar to the, quote, central governor theory, in that it's the brain's primal way of protecting us from harm?
I'm not familiar with the central governor theory, but yeah, I do think fear is a survival mechanism. It's designed to protect us. The problem comes when it sort of goes into overdrive or when it tries to protect us from the wrong things, but it's there to keep us alive. It's there to say, you're in danger, there's a threat. The problem is just calibrating it appropriately, I guess.
It's kind of interesting because the central governor theory is a thing that this guy Tim Noakes in South Africa wrote about. And he basically said, when you're exhausted, you're not really that tired. Like, you feel like I can't take another step, but then you can, So it's the central governor is your brain saying, just stop, So he's dealing with the whole thing of fatigue because we're never as tired as we think we are. And I think it might be similar with fear because if you had to, you could react, yet somehow there's something in your brain which is making a decision for you, even though there's no mechanical reason why you can't keep going.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good comparison. Yeah, that's okay. I do know that idea around endurance and that sort of thing, right? That you can all push further than your brain thinks. Yeah. I think that's a good comparison. Particularly if your fear is sort of over-regulating you. Some people's sort of, if you think of fear as sort of like a guardrail, some people's is more, generous than others. But if your fear is really sort of keeping you on a short leash, then you can absolutely do more than your brain is telling you can.
This next question is from Thomas. They say, what kind of psychology studies and resources are referenced in Nerve?
So it's part memoir and part science journalism. So it's not like a super deep dive, but I do have a list of studies, books, and papers that I referenced at the back of the book. I looked at some classic stuff like Little Albert and Little Peter, the sort of early fear conditioning studies that were done in the 1920s with like experiments on children that would be super illegal today. I looked at some of Pavlov's work. I looked at trying to think. I talked to, for people I spoke to directly, it was primarily neuroscientists and a couple of clinical psychologists as well. I looked at some of the research into EMDR, which is a trauma therapy that I underwent in the book. And I looked at different papers around acrophobia specifically and sort of origins of phobias more broadly. So that a useful answer? There is a full bibliography in the book.
Well, trust me, you covered everything. I'm reading through this book and I just felt my own ego shrinking. Like, oh my God, you go back to Hippocrates, you went back to the Bible. You talked about fear as like the 11th commandment. I believe there's anything written about fear, it's already in that book.
Well, thanks.
This next question is from Aaron. They say, I love that you referenced that fear is biologically or evolution based. I feel like explaining this in therapy can help empower people to address fears. Any other tips for empowering people to want to or feel able to address a fear?
Yeah, it's a tough thing, but I think letting go a lot of the sort of shame and stigma that we have around fear. You know, we talk so much about fear as a weakness, fear as, you know, cowardice is a bad thing, and it's something that we're taught to like bury or conquer or defeat. And it's natural, right? It is. I started this book project wanting to like conquer my fears, and by the end I was at this sort of happier medium with, you know, I was in sort of like a healthier relationship with my fear instead of a dysfunctional relationship, I guess. So to the extent that we can convince people that, yeah, it's biological and it's natural and it's okay to feel this way. What matters is how we react and how we live our lives, and the extent to which this does or doesn't derail our lives and the way we want to live them.
Just to piggyback off that, our next question. This is a great question. So, Chris, if there's one question you didn't ask, and this is the one. It's around the stigma of fear. So Jess asked this question. They say there are a number of professional fields, legal and medical to name two, where admitting to anxiety and phobias and such are seen as, quote, weak and stop people from reaching out for help. What suggestions do you have to help mainstream society see anxiety and phobia as okay and not something to keep hidden?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first step is that those of us who aren't likely to face professional consequences need to be as open as we can, and hopefully that starts to make room for other people to be more free to say to their boss, you know, I'm having a panic attack. You know, it's a hard thing, and I do think we are seeing gradual improvement in talking about this stuff and in having a little more room for it, but we have a long way to go. And the best thing I can think of is that those of us who have the freedom to talk about it need to, so that people who are in a field where it's just something that you could not really admit to, hopefully things get better.
So I just have a quick question here. You know, when I first picked up this book, the first thing I thought was, this is really like vulnerable. And like Chris said, it's like brave to write about this stuff and admitting to this stuff. Can you talk about that process of like, you know, deciding to put the pen on the page and write it? You know, it's both scientific in that it is, you know, the adventures in the science of fear, but it's also deeply personal. So can you talk more about that?
Yeah, it was a big debate of how much of the personal to put in versus the science. You know, it could have been a pure science book, but I wanted to be clear about where I was coming from and why. And the reason why I wanted to do this research and throw myself into these situations and figure this stuff out was so personal, and it felt weird to leave it out to me. It felt almost dishonest to leave it out. And I guess I didn't really, I had a very powerful denial mechanism while I was writing it. I just didn't think about the fact that it was going to be public eventually. I think if I had thought too much about it, I wouldn't have been able to do it. But I just kind of pretended that I was writing it for my, you know, my agent and my book editors and nobody else. And that got it written, and now it's out in the world. And I haven't, to be totally honest, I haven't had a lot of angst about it being out there. The thing that I feel most self-conscious about probably is the car accidents. I feel like people are going to be like, I'm not getting in a car with you.
Which is probably very, very, very fair.
It might be fair. I'm a good driver, you guys.
Hey, I got to ask you about the writing of it too, because when you and I were chatting on the phone, I'm like, yeah, it must have been kind of a hard 2 years of work on this book. You're like, 2 years, dude. I knocked this out in 6 months or whatever it was. I was astonished. Like, what gives you the nerve to write a book that fast?
You were waiting for a chance to say what gives you the nerve.
Yeah, I should have let off with it.
I did write it fast. I I had 11 months from when I got the book contract to when my first draft was due. And I hope my editors aren't watching this. I did not start right away. Shockingly, a writer procrastinated. I wrote the bulk of it I wrote parts of it earlier, but I wrote the back 2/3, I would say, in 4.5, 5 months.
Nice.
Wow.
It was fast. It was a long, dark winter of typing a lot of words. But I don't know. I've always been fast. You know, I've been a full-time freelancer for over a decade, and my secret, often when, especially in lean times, has been quantity. You know, I hope that as my career has progressed, I've been able to take more time and that my work has gotten better as a result. But I've always been able to just like turn things around quickly. And I worried this time, honestly, with the book. I was like, have I taken it too far this time? Now I just have to write 45,000 words before spring? But that was what I did. I cleared my schedule and I wrote, 4,000 words a week, every week until it was done. And I turned it into my editors and was like, well, it's a book. It exists. And then, and then we had 6 months to work on revisions. And so I was able to take some time with it at that stage. But that's always worked best for me, is like write fast, edit slow.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's where fear plays a great, useful role as a writer. Like, I'm the same way. Like, if no one's yelling at me, then why am I working? So I need to feel the desperation, like, oh my God, I'm on the verge of absolute disaster. Then I get kind of motivated. But I wonder in your case, because you're dealing with such bruising stuff, I wonder if it wasn't a useful expedient, that giving yourself a compressed period of time just let you head down and barrel through.
Yeah, and there were parts of it I think I couldn't write until I was sort of up against the wall. I definitely, I avoided writing some of the really hard parts until later in the process, and then I was like, well, now you gotta kind of rip off that Band-Aid, and yeah, maybe that was necessary. I also, I worked on the book proposal on and off for 2 years before we got the deal, and so I almost spent more time on the proposal than executing. So sometimes, you spend a lot of time like arranging something in your head, and then you sit down and do it, and it goes fast because you spent so long thinking it through. Maybe that was part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. One last thing too, Alex, I just got to ask, now I got like sort of like, inside baseball curiosity. You really know your way around science. Like, you're very comfortable with studies and research and scientific method and references. Has that been kind of your go-to, or is that a skill set you developed from working on this book?
I'm so glad you said that, because the science, honestly, like, people ask me if I was scared to write the personal stuff. The science was what scared me about this book. I do not have a strong science and math background. I've gotten into science writing more in my career through sort of the side door of environmental writing, but I hadn't written a lot of hard science stuff before this. Really not. Some of the neuroscience was pretty intense, and that was my biggest imposter syndrome working on this book. Was like, can I do this? Am I going to screw it all up? And what I did to help with that fear is I hired a fact checker. My friend Jane is an amazing freelance writer, Jane C. Hugh. And she also happens to have a PhD in psychology and had fact-checked similar science books and knows her ins and outs. And a lot of what we worked on was not just straight fact errors, but framing the research appropriately. I think that's often what goes wrong with science journalism, is like overstating study results, blowing something up bigger than it really is. And I wanted to be careful that I framed things correctly. Like, here's what this research could suggest, but it's one study, it's limited, it's interesting, but it's not definitive. Science is all about gradual accumulation of results shaping a bigger picture, right? And so I'm thrilled to hear that I seemed comfortable, because actually I was terrified.
Oh, just that phrase you used was gradual accumulation of facts. How'd you say it again?
Oh, I've already forgotten.
That's exactly the way a scientist would talk. It was perfect.
We got to wrap up here in just a couple minutes, but I just had a couple questions I wanted to get through. We touched on this point a little bit about exposure therapy. For our audience members out there, could you Could you define it and then just go a little deeper? Like, could you tell me one thing you did in the process of writing this book that was exposure therapy?
Sure. So exposure therapy can mean something pretty specific, but it also describes sort of a range of therapies that involve exposing yourself to the trigger of your fear, the source of your fear, or sometimes exposing yourself to sort of the secondary symptoms. In the case of trauma, for instance, exposure therapy, let's say you were in a mass shooting at a mall. Exposure therapy in that case wouldn't mean exposing yourself to another mass shooting. It would mean exposing yourself to the mall again. And it's gradual, it's incremental, and it's about relearning those pathways to not panic in situations that have frightened you in the past or really terrorized you in the past. It's used for phobias and trauma. And what I did is I tried to learn to rock climb to address my fear of heights. That was one of the things I tried to do to deal with my fear of heights. And so I picked really simple beginner grade routes, and I did the same routes over and over again. I didn't try to push it to make them harder. I didn't try to always get to the end every time. I just tried to get as far as I could while staying calm, and then one step further the next time.
And then just final question for the both of you. I always love asking this question, but you're both two best-selling writers here. What are you reading these days? Do you have any recommendations outside of your books? That's the only thing, you can't recommend each other's books. Something you're reading these days to recommend to our viewers.
Chris, you want to go first?
Go for it.
I just read Hidden Valley Road by Robert Kolker. It's a brilliant nonfiction narrative about a family with 12 children, 6 of whom develop schizophrenia, and what that family has sort of, not only what they've been through, but what they've taught scientists about schizophrenia. It's a pretty heavy read. I wouldn't call it like light summer reading, but I found it fascinating.
So I'll expose a fear right now too. It's probably actually really a resentment. I have a lot of trouble reading any current books because I envy and resent anybody who's getting more attention or selling more books than I am. Like, for a long time, the word skloot, the name skloot, was like a curse in my house. Like, skloot. I will not read Henrietta Lacks because it is such a universally beloved book that just, there's no way I could ever smile favorably upon a book that everybody else likes so much. And that's the way I feel with Robert Kolker's book too. It's like so universally praised as a masterpiece that there's no way. So I only feel comfortable reading stuff that's at least like 50 years old. So a few of the books I put on that list I'm rereading now again, Alex. So Aunt Julia and the Scriptwriter by Mario Vargas Llosa, I'm reading for like the 5th time. And Frederick Forsyth, man, I've just gone down the Frederick Forsyth foxhole where I just can't get enough. Like, the dude is a master at what he does. I just reread Avenger, which is just amazing. How it is in a film, I can't figure out. So yeah, Aunt Julie and the Scriptwriter and Avenger are my 2 current recommendations.
Great, awesome. I love book recommendations. It's great. So okay, we got to wrap up. Nerve, here it is.
Yay!
If you want to purchase the copy, click the green button below. Again, it's below our faces. That'll take you to our screen. We also have Running with Sherman. Thank you, Chris, for coming and doing this interview. This was a great conversation. Thanks so much for coming to virtual Harrisburg. Very appreciated. We can't wait to see. Chris, can't wait to see you after this whole thing dies down. Eva, hopefully maybe you'll take a trip to the States in the future. But I'll give you the last word to our audience.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks for tuning in wherever you are. And, this is such a weird, crazy time, but keep supporting authors and bookstores wherever you can.
And congratulations, Eva, on your ability to either time travel or read brains, because who else came out with a book about fear right during this situation? Genius. Great job.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks everyone. Stay safe.
All right, guys. See ya.